pleasure to be here this evening to offer you welcome to country for the Indigenous Science Experience as part of National Science Week 2015. We are gathered on the traditional land of the Gadigal, who are one of 29 clans of the Eora Nation, which is bordered by the Hawkesbury, the Georges and the Nepean rivers. I'm an Aboriginal woman who proudly identifies with the Wiradjuri Nation through my family connections from a town called Cowra in central west New South Wales. I was born on Gadigal land and I've had the privilege to live, work and raise my 4 children on this land for most of my life. I acknowledge the Gadigal, their spirits and ancestors who will always remain with the land, Mother Earth, and thank them for their ongoing custodianship and for allowing us to gather on their land for this evening of astronomy. I pay my respects to our elders, both past and present, and realise the sacrifices made by our leaders to create a better future for Aboriginal people. I do this as a reminder and as a tribute to elders and those who have gone before us to fight for land rights, justice and equity for our communities. I extend my respects to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people from all clans and nations who are present this evening. I also recognise our non-Aboriginal sisters and brothers who walk beside us to celebrate traditional and Western science. I now offer you a warm and sincere welcome to the land of the Gadigal of the Eora Nation and wish you a safe stay on the land and safe travel from the land. On behalf of my community and the Gadigal, I wish you a great evening hearing about traditional knowledge and Aboriginal culture in science and the relevance to our everyday lives. In closing, we remember that this is, was and always will be Aboriginal land. Have a great evening. Thank you.
Basically overwhelmed with the number of interested coming tonight. So, and we're on quite a tight schedule. So I've got pretty much a 50-minute talk. I've got to do 30 minutes. So I'll try and go through as quick as possible. But I'm from Nura Gili. It's the slideshows here. We've got a small team, or a growing team of Indigenous astronomers. Well, we call ourselves cultural astronomers because we do not just Indigenous astronomers within Australia and Torres Strait, but also other places around the world. But our main focus at the moment is the Indigenous astronomy within Australia and the Torres Strait regions. So my presentation tonight is called Open Your Eyes to Aboriginal Skies, and what I'm going to do is just a basic overview of the way that we see night sky from a cultural perspective. And this is the National Science Week, so I thought I'd start by just going through some background. By the way, who in here is who's really obviously interested in astronomy? So you're quite. Show of hands, yeah, you all like astronomy? Okay, so we've been overwhelmed recently, of course, especially recently with all the fantastic images coming through from the various space probes, things like that. With the Pluto one just recently, just one of the asteroids of Sirius. And sometimes we forget through all of this wonderful technology we have that we've been observing the night sky for thousands and thousands and thousands of years. And we as cultural astronomers are very, very interested in the field of how we have observed the night sky in past cultures, also present cultures too. And we've always looked up, as the slide says here. And just give you an example, I'm just going to go out of Australia at the moment and just start from a different place. This is a cave painting, some of you might recognise this. This is in the Lasso painted cave in France. And in the Hall of the Bulls, where this painting comes from, this is one painting in particular. And there was, some years ago, there was a guy who was exploring the cave, and he just so happened to have a background in astronomy, and you recognised, he looked at that and saw something that looked familiar to him. Can anyone sort of have a guess at what that one might be in particular, or what we think it could be? Okay. Well, have a look at the comparison. with one of our zodiac constellations, Taurus. You see the similarities? Also take note of that little group of stars up there. That's known as the Pleiades or the Seven Sisters. Very important to a lot of cultures around the world, also through Australia. Major dreamings all the way through Australia are based around those stars. And they just so happen to be on the back of the bull, as the Western astronomy sees it. And if you look at the Kane, you can see that little group of dots at the top there too. And notice that the positioning is very, very similar. Now, that cave painting is about 17,000 years old, and it's believed to be one of the earliest known representations of that constellation that we know as Taurus today. So that just gives you an idea of how long and how continuous some of these traditions could be. And by the way, we cannot verify that this is representing that constellation. There's no way we can go to someone and ask them, which is something we can do here, fortunately. But based on, appearances more than anything else, that we think it might represent that constellation. Okay? So that's a good segue, I thought, into the rest of the presentation. So here's the Seven Sisters. This is the Pleiades. Beautiful little cluster of stars. How many have actually seen the Pleiades in the night sky? Quite a few of it yet? Okay. Now, they're a very young group of stars. If you were living back when the dinosaurs were still roaming the planet, those stars didn't exist. They've only come into existence since the dinosaurs passed away, about 70 million years ago or so. So, in astronomical terms, very, very young stars. However, as I said before, very, very important to a lot of cultures around the world, and especially here in Australia, the Indigenous cultures have a lot of stories based around those little group of stars. For the East Coast, along here, the heliacal rise of the Seven Sisters heralds the northwards migration of the whales. The orca and the humpbacks all start to move up the coast from Antarctica to the birthing grounds at the heliacal rise of the Pleiades. In the central desert, that heliacal rise also was an indicator for the start of winter in the desert, the frosts. In some traditions they call the frost maidens, and also they're linked to the dingo breeding cycle. So they started breeding birth pups around about that time. Now I mentioned heliacal rise a couple of times, so I'm going to explain what that means exactly. If we go back to an image of the sky here, I've got the constellation of Taurus there, and on the right of it I've got Orion, as we see it from here in Australia. It's upside down in our skies. The Seven Sisters, the Pleiades, just that little group of stars just up there in the bull there, in the shoulder. And you can see they're just above the horizon. That green line is the horizon line. And the sun, this is looking east, so the eastern horizon, just before sunrise. So it's just before the sky gets too light to see any stars. And there's a particular time of the year that happens. So I've set the date down there. You can see I set it 1788, just for historical accuracy. But if you look at the date there, it's around about the 13th of June, so mid-June, heliacal rise. So that's the indicator in this instance for the start of the whale migrations, dingo breeding season, beginning of winter in some places, and there's lots of other stories all surrounding it. So there's an example where observation was very important. Remember, this, as I say, natural science is all about observation of the natural world and explanations for it. There's an example where they're using science, observation of a particular cluster of stars, to indicate a calendar, a seasonal calendar. Very, very important. So there we go. Pleiades there, sun there. So in this case, I've got the Pleiades sort of about 5 degrees above the horizon, just as you see it rise for the very, very first time before the sun rises too high and washes out the night sky. So that's a heliacal rise. Now, is there a single Aboriginal astronomy? You know, we're here to talk about Aboriginal astronomy. But as you can see, quite a few of you might be familiar with this map. This is the map of all the different language groups in Australia that we know of. There may have been more than this. These are the ones that were recorded. So we have about 200-300, and some say anything up to 500-600 language groups, dialects, etc., etc. With all those different countries, we can't actually say that there's a single astronomy. Each one of those, we have to treat each one of those language groups as a separate nation with their own astronomies. Having said that, however, there are threads that run across the country that are common, or seem to be common, across the land through some of the dreaming tracks, for instance. So when we do our research, we do it by language group, but we also look beyond the language group. I have to also mention where those stories come from to get a context. Okay, so I'm only going to, in the time I have, going to cover a few stories that sort of just outline the science behind the astronomy, and the Indigenous, the cultural astronomy. So here we go. We'll just go back to how modern Western astronomers see the night sky, and it's represented by 88 constellations. These are mostly based on the mythologies from the Northern Hemisphere, usually Greek, Babylonian, Sumerian, Egyptian, and based on gods, cultural heroes, mythical beasts, animals, etc., etc. And where that astronomy differs from Indigenous astronomy here is that they tend to join the dots between stars. The word constellation is a collection of stars in a pattern. It's different, a little different here. For instance, I'll just give you an example. This is the Boron night sky from the Mallee country in Victoria, the Wergaya Nation. And the thread here is that it's not connect the dots, it's individual stars happen to be the important aspect in the concept. So each of those animals are represented by usually a single star. Okay, and here's another example. That's the Kamilaroi night sky. That's the work of Bob Fuller here. He'll be talking just straight after me. So again, they don't necessarily join the dots. However, there are occasions they may join the dots in some examples. Also important in Aboriginal astronomy is that some of the animals that are represented are actually made up by the dark spaces in the sky, not just the stars too. Hence, as I'll mention in the first instance, that emu you see there features prominently in the astronomies across most of Australia, and it's formed by a part of that. And anyone want to sing out what they think that might be, that part of the sky? You probably can't see it, well, you wouldn't see it from Sydney, I can guarantee you won't see that. You have to go a couple of hours west. Okay, that is, that's the band of Milky Way, and it's our viewpoint in our spiral galaxy, the Milky Way galaxy. And we're in one of those spiral arms. And because we're inside the galaxy looking through it, we see this projection of all those stars that form this band across there. But can anyone see a particular pattern in those dark patches there in the Milky Way? You put your hand up if you think you know what it is and call it out. Yep.
It's the centre of the galaxy.
It's the centre, yeah, definitely the centre of the galaxy is through there. It's in the constellation Scorpius. Unfortunately, I don't have a pointer, it's a bit hard to point there. But can you see a shape in there that might be represented by an animal?
Is it an emu?
Yes, it's the emu in the sky, correct. Okay. Very, very important, as I said, it's a common thread that runs across the country. So there we go. If you go up to Ku-ring-gai, there's a rock carving just up amongst all the other carvings of an emu. And the orientation is interesting because if you stand in that direction facing the horizon, at a particular time of year, you'll see the emu and the sky rising over that rock arc. And we believe that it was used as an indicator, a calendrical indicator. If we go and have a look at the way the sky rotates through the year, and around about April, May, and this is just after sunset. It's the first thing you see after sunset. On the eastern horizon, you just see the emu starting to rise. Now, at that time, it just so happens that the emus are starting to chase one another. They've been the mating behaviour, is that correct? I'm checking the box, this is one of his stories. So they're in the process of just mating. A bit later in the year, around about that position, so we're going into about May, June. If you see it in the sky in that position, that's when they're sitting on the nest with eggs. A bit later in the year, you see it in that position, and we're going sort of June, July. It's now too late to go and collect the emu eggs, because the eggs themselves were a very, very important food source for a lot of Aboriginal people. When they saw the emu in the sky in that position, then no, it was too late. They're already, the eggs are developing and they're forming chicks, so they're leaving well alone. There's one other orientation which is very, very important. So that was more of a food resource calendar. It also has another aspect, and this is more of a cultural aspect to it. You see the emu in the sky oriented in this position, head straight down pointing to the ground, almost south, it's just slightly west of south. That was seen as a time, this is about mid-August going into September, it's around about now actually, just going through it, that they started to prepare for the Bora initiations, turning boys into men. And in the emu itself, they saw the dark patches, they saw two particular circles. And it's thought that they also represented represented on the ground as the way the Bora is constructed in two circles. There's a large circle, and then there's a smaller circle, and the orientation between the two lines up pretty well in that direction. If you actually do and Bob's done this actually as part of his research, that direction is the way that the Bora ground is constructed. So very, I would say it's culturally important to know the orientation, to have the grounds themselves match that orientation. Also, interestingly, you know how I was saying that the emus were sitting on the eggs, on the nest? Do you think it's the male or the female emus that do this? Got a few puzzle faces, haven't they? Interestingly, it's the male emus that actually sit on the eggs, raise the chicks when they hatch, and look after them when they're still young. And it's probably that aspect that also plays that important relationship between why the emu is important in the initiation, because the Bora initiation is bringing those young boys, raising them up, turning them into men, and it's symbolic in the way that the male emus raise their own chicks. So, beautiful one-to-one correspondence there. Another story we'll go into, this is going into the Boron, not sky, from the word Iron Nation. This is Mallee country. MerJa Media is an interesting one. The story itself is that many years ago, I'm talking very early periods of time here, there was a major drought on, and MerJa Media was a woman of her people who was out one day. She was just foraging for food. Food was very, very short. Her tribe were pretty much starving. She was almost to the point of giving up. But one day she noticed, she was watching some ants on the ground. And she decided to follow them and see where those ants were going. They were sort of following a little trail into the grasses, into the woods. And noticed they were going down a hole. And she wondered where they were going. So she dug through and down and then uncovered an ant's nest full of larvae. They're called bitter in that language. And through her desperation and her hunger, she decided to grab a handful and eat some. And she noticed after doing so that her energy started to return. So she took some more. And she thought, well, this, I'm feeling more energized, and I'm going to go and tell the rest of my family this is probably the way we're going to survive this drought. So she got the rest of the group to start eating the larvae as well. And by doing so, she actually saved her group, her family. So on her passing, she was, for her deeds, she was actually placed into the sky as one of the stars. And we know today as Arcturus. It's beautiful, you can see it's a nice golden orangey colour, beautiful star. Brightest star in the northern hemisphere night sky. It's about the fourth brightest in the stars overall. And it's also an indicator star. It's a calendar star which is used. And the way it's used is that unlike the way that the Pleiades was used with the light horizon, it's, in this case, it's when Arcturus, that star there represented by that, you can see that the stars up in the head of the ant there, when it crosses the meridian in the sky after sunset, and the meridian is that line there, you trace a line from due north to due south, right across the top of the sky, so it's the highest point of the star will right before it starts to drop down again. It's the meridian. That tells them that it's time to harvest the ant larvae, and have the ant larvae in the nest, so they can use that as a food source. So very, very important in that respect. So yes, commemorate it in the stars. The star itself used as that calendar, an indicator. Now going to the central desert region around Alice Springs, there's this wonderful impact crater that we know is an impact crater for the geological record. It's known as Nura. This is from the Aranda lands, and there's a wonderful story that's told of its creation by the Aranda people. And the story goes something like this. There was a group of young women that wanted to, and they were stars, and they wanted to dance amongst the stars of the Milky Way. So they all started moving up. But one of the sisters, one of the women, had a young boy. You probably recognise that. So she was carrying her young boy one of these. You probably know it as a crewman, but out there it's called a turner. If you go to the Pitjantjatjara lands, it's known as a piti. So different languages all have different names for it. Anyway, she was holding on to the baby like this, and she obviously couldn't dance like this. So what she did was she placed it on the Milky Way, and went up and danced with the rest of her sisters. But she didn't realise that as the sky turned, the baby slipped off, and so did the turner. Slipped off the Milky Way, and it came crashing to Earth. The baby hit the ground first, went bang, straight into the ground, and the turner fell pretty much directly on top of it. So what you're seeing is the impression of the turner. The baby's under there somewhere. But the mother didn't know that. She looked around, looked everywhere for a baby, and according to the story, she and her partner are still to this day looking for the baby. So they have this eternal search through the sky. So the evening star and the morning star, the mother and the father of the baby still in search of the baby that hit the ground. Now it's very interesting, that story, because it does explain the origins of the crater formation. It's an impact crater, we know that. But the interesting thing is its age. This one is quite old. It's about 142 million years old. So there's absolutely no way it could have been eyewitness account. So how can we explain the origins of how this formation came from? Obviously, the story relates to an impact event. Well, push one up. There we go. Sorry about that. Interesting enough, so we have, what's this bluff is there, 142 million years old. Obviously could not be seen, as an eyewitness event of the whole thing. However, nearby we have craters that are much more recent in origin. And these could have been seen, I'm very certain they were seen by the same people in their, and recorded in their oral histories, and knew the connection between the impact and the result of the impact on the Earth, the formation. And through good science, good interpretation, put two and two together and went, well, if that's what created these formations on the Earth, that's what created that. And I'm very certain that's how they came up with the wonderful story of the baby that fell to Earth that created that formation across this platform, Nura. Interestingly enough, also they do relate that story to a particular part of the Milky Way. And this is one of those rare occasions where you do join with lots of the stars. There's this little group of stars called Corona Australis in our modern Western astronomy. And it has this wonderful shape. Can you see that sort of curve to it there? You have a look at that there. Can you see that? That is the Turner, the Leaman. And it's on the Milky Way, just as the story tells us. And as the sky rotates at night, so does the Leaman, the Turner turns. So putting two and two together. Perfect explanation of what the story is relating to. Okay, final story. This is a Wiradjuri story, and I just call it the moon and boomerang story. And always come prepared for crops. Okay. This story takes us back to the beginning of time, and there were no people, there were just animals. And from his sky world, looking down on the Earth, he heard four animals. This is probably only the creator spirit, looking down at these four animals who were arguing amongst themselves. And the argument was basically based around who was the racer of them, who was better at being that particular animal than the other three. There was a koala, kangaroo, emu, and eagle. The biology thought it'd be good to come down to Earth and just settle the argument once and forever, but he decided to do it in a very, very wise way, by showing them that they thought they were great. So what he did was he said to them, he offered them a challenge. He said to each one of them in turn, prove to me how good you are. Show me your greatest feat. So he goes to the emu first. Is it okay? There you go. Show me what you can do. And of course the emu is named for its speed. So the emu took off and just ran around, and none of the other animals could keep up with it. And the emu came back with the animal sort of slowly walking behind. There you go, I've outrun you, I'm the greatest. The bono says, no. It's the other's turn now. Okay, eagle, your turn. So the eagle, for his feat, decides to fly as high as he could until he became invisible. He was so high he just disappeared from sight. And then slowly worked back down to the ground. So there you go. Try and beat that, guys. But Byron said, no. It's the next one's turn now. So kangaroo decided to show what he could do. So he takes off and he bounds across country. And in one mighty leap, he disappears over the horizon and then he returns. So he said, okay, I think I've won the argument. No, koala's turn. So what koala did was he found the tallest tree and he climbed right up to the top of the tree and he hung on while the wind blew. And no matter how strong the wind blew and how far the tree shook from side to side, he hung on. And he just dozed off for a while just to prove, yeah, I'm the greatest and I can just do nothing and still beat you guys. So he goes back down and said, oh, Byron's quite impressed with that. But Byron said, okay, yes, you've all done very well, but I'll show you my feat now. And little did they know, they didn't realise, that he had also brought to Earth the very, very first returnable boomerang. And what he did first is he threw it so hard it circled around the heads of all the animals. And of course, being a returning boomerang, he caught it again. And they were absolutely stunned when they saw this. I thought, okay, that's it, you've won. However, Byron had one last trick up his sleeve. He picked up the boomerang again, and he threw it so hard this time that it sailed right over the western horizon and disappeared from sight. And they thought that was the end until they noticed right in the same direction that the boomerang was thrown, there was a little glow on the horizon. And it started to grow brighter and brighter. And it became the first crescent moon. And to this day, in the Wiradjuri language, the word for boomerang, or one of the words for boomerang, is bargain. The word for crescent moon is bargain. Just in big boomerang. Now, that story also is interesting because it does sort of tell you what the moon does. Okay? We know that the moon, during its daily travel, does go from east to west. In the night sky, in the daytime sky too, it moves east to west, just like the boomerang, the direction that you threw the boomerang. The moon also, in its monthly journey, travels from west to east. It returns. So the relationship between the moon and the boomerang is very, very apt. So embedded in that story, one interpretation is correct, that they're saying that we know the moon moves this way, but it also moves that way in the sky too. So, and finally, time? Okay. I'm going to finish right there, sorry guys, and I'll move on. Okay, thank you very much. I'm going to pass you on to Bob Fuller, who's going to do the next presentation. And I've got to disappear downstairs, there's more people.
Because we're running, simultaneous, we're trying to link up the presentations so there's not too much of a gap downstairs. I'm Bob Fuller. I'm a colleague of Trevor's at University of New South Wales, Nura Gili. And I'll give you a little bit shorter one because we are running a little bit behind tonight. And basically this is a little bit different. Trevor's given you a really good background on Aboriginal astronomy and some good stories. And this is a particular piece of knowledge that's come out in my research. And rather than just talk about it from a scientific point of view, I've basically posed a question here. And that's that Aboriginal people design our roads. So basically, what do you think? Do you think they actually sat down in 1788 and designed our roads and surveyed them and everything? I mean, it wouldn't seem very likely, would it? But it's an interesting question and has a fairly interesting answer as well. This was my research amongst the Gummaroy and Uwallie people who are up in the northwest of New South Wales and into Queensland. Basically, the Gummaroy start around the Hunter Valley and go up to the border, and the Uwallie are from out around Walgett and a little bit west and up into Queensland as well. Michael Anderson is a Uwallie culture man, also probably well known to some of you as a politician and one of the single remaining survivor of the Kane embassy as well. So he has an interesting background. He told me this story when I was collecting stories up in that area. As you can see, Uwallie is up there. Lightning Ridge is sort of in the middle of the Uwallie country. Kaduga is another small town in Uwallie country as well. So why did I learn this story? Basically, this story is about Indigenous technology and science, really. And it says a lot about how people manage to do things that we find quite difficult to understand, even to this day. And in this particular case, this is a story which is based on what would be fairly normal living in the old days. You're living outside, you're living under the stars, and you're basically teaching the young people at the same time as well. That's the purpose of the elders and the grandparents, is to teach the young people the knowledge that they need to survive. And that's a pretty tough country, particularly up there in the north there. So you can imagine sitting around the campfire and discussing this information. So what does this have to do with designing roads? It doesn't sound much like it, does it? So how did Aboriginal people travel before Europeans came to Australia? Anybody want to answer? Yeah. They walked, of course. Yes, that's how people got around, they walked. And where did they walk when they left their own country? Because, as you know, country is probably the most important thing to Indigenous people. And it was well known their own country when they're living there, but they had to leave their country sometimes. So what were they doing? So they were going for trading. They were going to places where they could gather resources, usually in a cooperative manner with the people who lived there. And they also traveled for ceremonies. Having ceremonies together, like Trevor was talking about the Bora ceremony. It was very common to go to another country to share initiation with another language group, another community. So they had lots of reasons to travel, and they traveled very long distances. We have evidence that, for example, people traveled from Queensland Channel Country all the way down to Victoria just to go for trading. And they went long distances for ceremonies as well. I'll tell you some later. So this brings up the question, how do people learn how to travel outside their own country? I mean, this would be like us going to a foreign country and not having ever been there before. So how did people get taught to do that? They didn't have paper maps like we have today. And did they use celestial navigation? Well, We know that Aboriginal people could use stars to travel at night, but it's not like celestial navigation we know, where they use the stars to tell them where they are. They would tend to use the stars to know how to go in a certain direction. They didn't have compasses, and we know they didn't have GPS as well. So they had to do it by memory. And the question is, how do you memorize travel over long distances? And when I say long distances, I'm going to show you shortly just how far those distances could be. So they needed a memory aid, really. I mean, if you think about trying to remember something like how to get across Sydney without having a GPS, you need something that'll give you some ideas on how to remember it. Now, we can use a map to do that, but it might actually be a case where you're driving and you can't use your street directory, and you just have to write some notes down and you've got to memorize them. So you need a memory aid. So what's permanent if you're living out in the country and you're not having all these nice aids that we have today? What about the stars? Stars are there, they're permanent. They look the same every year at the same time. And so what people, the UALI at least did, and we believe a lot of different communities and language groups did, they used star maps for teaching people how to travel to destinations. Now these star maps were used just like GPS. They were waypoints where you could see things on the ground, such as water holes, bends in the river, maybe a stone arrangement, maybe a marked tree. These are all waypoints. Yeah, it's just like GPS. And these were a memory aid. So remembering the routes and the waypoints when you wanted to travel to a particular place. So what did a star map look like? This is one from Gadooga, which is up in UALI country. And it goes up to the Bunya Mountains in Queensland, which are northwest of Brisbane. And the Bunya Mountains, of course, is where bunya nuts come from the bunya pine. And this was a shared resource amongst a lot of groups in that part of Australia. So if you look up in the sky, and you can see that that's to the southeast, and that's a particular time of year, which happens to be around this time of the year. You look up there, and there's a pattern of stars. And that, of course, being, every year the same stars come back at the same time as the Earth rotates. So that particular pattern of stars would be there every year at the same time. And August was when people sat down and they started to plan their travel for the summertime. And they would be teaching people how to travel. And they would use a star map like that. Now don't think of that star map as being celestial navigation. It's only a memory aid. In fact, it's even in the wrong part of the sky for the direction you're going to travel. But interestingly enough, the map actually looks a little bit like the route on the ground. Here's another one from, another one from Gadooga up to Carnarvon Gorge, which is also up in central Queensland. Carnarvon Gorge was a very important ceremonial place, and there was probably a lot of joint ceremonies done there. And once again, you can see it's in the same part of the sky, but it's a slightly different route. And then you want to have a look at these routes as you apply them to the map. And you can see they're similarly shaped. This is both the routes together. And they go to particular places, and each of those points there would have been one of the waypoints that pointed out in the star. And we think that these instructions were actually sung, and that these were actually song lines as well. So you could remember your route by remembering a song. That song included the knowledge about each of those waypoints. water hole, into the river, whatever it was. And then you could actually sing that song and remember your route. Clever technology. You see anything interesting, between the routes to Carnarvon Gorge, Bunny Mountains, and the modern map? Anybody want to tell me what it is? It's the roads, isn't it? It overlays most of the modern major roads in that area. So why would this be so? Think about back around when Europeans first started going up into this area. Who would be getting them around? It would be the local people. And why would the local people pick the hardest route? They would pick the route that they've been doing for millennia. And of course, the explorers would mark these routes. Soon the settlers would come along, they'd follow the same route. The drovers would come along with the cattle on the same route. And soon would be a dirt road, and eventually a paved road. And even more interestingly, look where the routes join. There's towns. That's typical. Where roads cross or join is often towns spring up. So did they design our roads? Well, in a sense they did. And I'm hearing from other people as I give this talk around, they're saying, oh yeah, we know about that too. And down in Bundina, down the national park, there's a bunch of roads down there through the park, and a number of people have commented that, yeah, those are song lines as well. So I suspect if you looked around Australia, you'd probably find a lot of cases where the actual road systems would follow the original paths that were taught to people using this technique of star maps. So now we know how Aboriginal people designed our roads. And we can go out and tell people, yeah, that road's Aboriginal design. I think we've got a little time because we're starting to catch up now. I kept this one pretty short. So if anybody's got any questions on this or anything that Trevor talked about, I'll see if I can answer.
Not so much a question, but the City of Sydney also notes on their website that Oxford Street, George Street, and other streets around major roads in Sydney are regional Aboriginal tracks as well.
Yeah, I'm quite sure of that.
I'm not sure if they're linked to the stars.
Yeah.
What? Oh.
I'm sorry.
We cannot hear the question.
Oh, the question wasn't a question, it was an answer that the City of Sydney actually lists Oxford Street and George Street and some others were originally Aboriginal tracks as well. So, I mean, even here in the city, these roads could have been part of the one of these routes as well. So I'm quite sure it's a pretty common thing, and as myself and Trevor and my colleagues explore a lot of this information, I think we're going to find more instances of it. So,
Does Nura Gili, or do you know any other online resources for
actually, that's the question was, does Nura Gili have any online resources in this area? We're actually, we do have a blog and Facebook, but we're just in the process of actually putting together a website which is going to contain a lot of resources. In fact, the movie that's being shown outside right now is eventually going to be on that website, and there'll be some school resources as well. And I guess as we find material and publish it, these will all be up there as well. Yes, sir.
Do you know of any other Indigenous cultures that might share this scientific tradition?
Of the star maps?
Yeah, or something similar.
Well, you mean outside of Australia?
Yeah.
I suspect it's very true, yeah. I think we might find this as something fairly universal. I mean, if we, as I mentioned earlier in the talk about the long distances, there's another route Uwallia route up to Quilpie in Queensland. And I'm curious how far it was, and it was like 600 kilometers. And then I heard that it was a ceremonial site, and that the Arunta people from north of Alice Springs would travel to meet the Uwallia area. And then I looked at that. It's 1,500 kilometers they walked. And how did they get there? I'm sure they used the same technique. But outside of Australia, I haven't seen anything written specifically about this. But I would be very... Well, excuse me, sorry. Trevor and I were talking about this the other day. Trevor's got Celtic background, and we talked about this. Apparently there's trackways in the UK which have very, very similar characteristics to this, and may very well have been connected to song as well. So we may very well find this as a universal human approach to oral cultures on how to teach instructions and how to remember instructions like that. Because we know that Aboriginal people had a fantastic ability to pass knowledge on from generation to generation, right up to today. And this is just one example of how to do that. I think we'll probably just check to see if the next speaker's ready. Oh, sorry, somebody have one more question? Go ahead.
I didn't quite get the name of the
So I can't quite hear you.
Can you go back so I can see the name of the
You talking about one of those slides?
yard?
Sorry, I think we're probably, I'll talk to you later. We can talk that one over, and I'll just pass over to Deb now, so let me just get you up on the screen.
I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land on which we're gathered, the Gadigal people, and I'd like to pay my respects to elders past and present. And I'm here tonight to tell you a little bit about the International Year of Light, and I'll also add in some bits I think are relevant to what we can discuss here tonight in the Aboriginal Astronomy. In terms of having one of these international years approved, then it's quite a big and laborious process for that to occur, and I'll give you a little bit of insight to this. I will mention a bit later on, we actually are in the process of doing research at Macquarie on using light and laser-based conservation techniques in both diagnosis and developing future treatments in the conservation of Aboriginal bark paintings, which is also very light-based. Okay. So the International Year of Light, that's this year. We're more than halfway through now. And this is sanctioned by UNESCO, who were the ones who promoted it to the United Nations. And, oops, and these were some of the key people who were involved in putting those the paperwork and presentations to UNESCO and the United Nations. And they've been getting a lot of attention this year, but I don't think anybody in the room particularly cares, but it's just nice to see that these things do take time and effort, and people do a lot of hard work so that we have an International Year of Light. And this was adopted by the United Nations on the 3rd of December 2013, and so then we had about a year to get going before the actual year happens, and now we're in the middle of it. So that's just some of the formal things. So why are we having an International Year of Light? We want to get attention noted for that science and applications of light create revolutionary but often unseen technologies that directly improve our quality of life worldwide. And so we are really on to a winner, we've discovered, with the International Year of Light. It turns out that it's emerging that this is probably the most successful international year that has ever been held. So people are really getting into it. And I think that tells us in itself that people do connect strongly with loving light and seeing its use around us. But the impacts are in all of the areas of health, communication, economy, environment, and in our society. Why? Light-based technology is a major economic driver. So, every government of every flavour wants us to be thinking about this as well. It is important to a nation like Australia that we do want to have a more knowledge-based economy. It's important across all our other dimensions of what makes life worth living, but it's also something that we can think of as light being the equivalent of electronics. What electronics was to the 20th century, light is emerging as being to the 21st century, and this year is in part about that. We know how to do things well here in Sydney, and so because we knew for about a year ahead of the International Year of Light that it was coming, then I was able to get in touch with the City of Sydney, who are the main people who support the community centre here as well, so and have a chat to them about wouldn't it be great if the New Year's Eve fireworks were the bringing in of the International Year of Light around the world. And they were very supportive of that idea. We were talking to them early enough that we were even able to have input into developing the theme for the icon on the Sydney Harbour Bridge for bringing in 2015. The theme for New Year's Eve 2014 was Inspire Sydney, and it was also the beginning of the International Year of Light. So the light bulb was an icon that fits both of those very well. The media actually picked up on it being the International Year of Light, and I haven't had the opportunity to talk to the City of Sydney about how happy they were about that, since it was Inspire Sydney and the International Year of Light, but we were very happy. And we were also very grateful for the support from the City of Sydney in also having some slideshows displayed on the Sydney Harbour Bridge on New Year's Eve. Okay, so in terms of the sort of international competitions that are going on, then in Britain they had some International Year of Light baubles on the Christmas tree outside 10 Downing Street, and in Sydney we had slides on the Sydney Harbour Bridge pylons, so we thought we were doing pretty well on getting the year off to a good start. But through that connection with the City of Sydney, then we also learned that every year the Lord Mayor hosts a picnic on New Year's evening, and 1,200 or so children who have challenges of various sorts in life are invited with their families to have an evening of celebration involving art and culture and activities and drama and food and celebration. And we found that we offered then into that a science-based, a light-based activity, taking over half of one of their tents. And that was the first time that a science-based activity had been included in the Lord Mayor's picnic. And so this is absolutely essential to what we were hoping to do in the year. This is putting science in its place as part of our culture. Okay? If we're having these cultural events, science should be there alongside all of the other elements of our culture. And light is actually very connecting for people, and we are able to offer demonstrations that are very interesting and engaging for the children and their families to enjoy on New Year's Eve last year. And I'm a person, I like words, and when I lecture my students and if a slide like this comes up, you just see them sort of, oh no, she's going to read it out. And I am, because this is Professor Barry Masters, who's put a lot of time and thought into these words, okay? Tasked with writing the major article for a newsletter of the International Commission of Optics, one of the main international organisations that represents optics in the world. He sat down and spent a lot of time coming up with the best possible words he could put together to describe why light is so important. And here we go. Light is a prerequisite for life, as it is the ultimate source of energy in our foods and our fossil fuels. Light is integral to religion, to creation stories, to poetry, to literature, to language and to art and culture. Light is atmospheric beauty, as in the sunrise and sunset, the rainbow, the aurora borealis, the aurora australis. Colours enrich our environment, stimulate and delight people in all lands, and add beauty to our homes, our cities, and our lives. Sunlight, moonlight, and starlight benefit and add beauty and wonder to all of Earth's people. Light is the foundation of our modern world. Its generation, manipulation, transmission, and detection, there had to be some sciencey stuff in there, are integral to our communication, manufacturing, medical devices, public art, light shows, biotechnological instrumentation, educational programs, and laboratory instrumentation for the advancement of science and technology. Light is the source of information on the creation of the universe, on photophysical processes in the stars, and on the universal nature of physical laws throughout the universe. Light, through the tool of spectroscopy, led to our theoretical and experimental knowledge of the structure of atoms and molecules. Light and its interaction with matter led to the invention and the development of quantum mechanics. Light has occupied the minds of poets, philosophers from the 5th century BCE, artists, scientists, and engineers. Today, light connects disparate people, cultures, and nations into the human family. Light fascinates, stimulates, and connects us. Children are amazed how sunlight is concentrated by a magnifying glass to kindle a fire. People are astonished when they look into a telescope or a microscope and see the microcosm and the macrocosm. Sometime it's worth saying a few words. I hope you agree. I'd like you all to, after the talk this evening, to be interested enough to go and learn some more about light. And one of the great successes of the International Year of Light has been a really well-designed website that's hosted in Italy and Europe. And these are just some of the images. Behind each of these images there's a story on this website. So this is a place where you can learn a great deal of interest that is written at a level for the public about light. So under the headings of Why Light Matters, learn about light, hands-on involvement, cosmic light, light for development, and science stories. So I've got some handouts I'll get out of my bag before at the end here, which has got these URLs on them, so you can pick one of those up, take it home, and start learning a bit more from that website. Okay. So this year is also an opportunity for the future. There's a lot of effort going into coordinating international activities and promoting new initiatives to support the potential of light technologies this year. So we're hoping that there'll be some good success from that as well. It's made it interesting to learn a little bit about the design of the logo here. The logo for the International Year of Light has the sun as the origin of light. Everything on our earth that lives depends on our sun. All of the energy that we use, whether it be fossil fuels or whatever else, we derive from our sun in one form or another. The flags indicate the international cooperation and inclusiveness, and the colours of the rainbow indicate the spectrum of all of our activities across science, art, culture and education. So it's a nice logo. Once the International Year of Light was announced, people started asking, what anniversaries are we celebrating? And people hadn't actually thought about celebrating any anniversaries. It hadn't been the primary motivator for the year. But since people were asking the question, they put their thinking caps on and came up with a list of anniversaries that we are indeed celebrating. We're celebrating 1,000 years since the Book of Optics was written by Ibn al-Hafid, and this has put international focus on the fact that a lot of the science, the early science in many areas, was not done in the Western world. Right? There's a lot of very good science done in the Middle East and also in China, and part of these years is to recover that history, and people, in terms of this increasing international understanding, for people to give attention to acknowledging that we didn't always invent it here, and other people's knowledge needs to be acknowledged, and I think that's very relevant to tonight's theme of Aboriginal astronomy as well. It's 100 years since a Frenchman called Fresnel came up with the wave theory of light, and he was quite a remarkable person, but I don't have time to flesh any of these people out for you. It's 150 years since James Clerk Maxwell came up with the theory of electromagnetism, which is still one of the most successful theories we have in physics to this day. People are still using that theory to solve real problems day by day by day in physics. It is still the theory. We've improved it by being able to have large computer calculations using it, but the basic theory is what Maxwell delivered to us 150 years ago. It's also a century since Einstein published his work on the general theory of relativity, and a few of you may be aware that 2005 was the International Year of Physics, or the Einstein year, celebrating it being a century since Einstein had discovered the photoelectric effect and some other things. It's a 50-year anniversary since the discovery of the cosmic microwave background, and since Charles Kao manufactured glass that had such a low level of impurities in it that light could be transmitted with it in an essentially lossless way. And this is the basis of the optical fibre communications that mean that we can talk to our families wherever they are in the world today in a relatively straightforward manner. Okay. I'm going to whip through a couple of these a bit more quickly because I want to get to, in terms of the cultural heritage side of things, one of the reasons that I started doing research that we're doing on the Aboriginal bark paintings was I was at an international workshop back in 2003 where some of the research that was being presented was some absolutely amazing research done in Europe on using laser and light-based techniques for diagnosing and remediating, conserving, treating great masters, the cultural heritage of Europe. Marble statuary, which has been outside, that's become all very dirty and grimy, it can be laser cleaned. And I was sitting in the airport as I was leaving Creek, and I thought to myself, our cultural heritage deserves that kind of respect and attention. And I'm sad to say that I still have not in that time managed to get any major research funding for this particular area of research, but we are still trying to, we're doing a small amount and trying to keep it alive and trying to build the momentum for when people will be ready to say our cultural heritage, our Aboriginal agricultural heritage deserves that kind of investment so that we can ensure that we can preserve these things on the scale of 1,000 years or more. You know, people just aren't thinking of the right timescales in regards to taking care of our cultural and art heritage. Particularly relevant to people who are interested in astronomy is background lighting in urban environments. Okay? When you come back in November and they've got the telescopes outside the community centre here, then you'll be able to look and see something, but you won't be able to see it very well because there's too much light in cities for really good stargazing. Okay? And one of the focuses of the International Year of Light is around trying to reduce the amount of urban light. This is both an energy conservation issue and also an urban environment issue. So this is showing you where the light is being generated around the world, and you can see it's mostly the developed world that's spraying all that light around. And we've got our major cities showing up as very significant hotspots as well. We get a bit close up on Sydney in there as well. So one of the things that there isn't a focus on for the International Year of Light is redesigning urban lighting so that we can try and avoid that. This is a waste of energy. We have street lights spraying light up into the sky. We're not trying to light the sky. We're trying to light the ground where the people are walking around and where it's a personal safety and security issue that we have a lighted way when we're walking about at night. So if I show you this from this rather nice simulator that you can go on the web and have a go at this yourself, popping lights around, you can see here that you've got these lights spraying light in all directions and you don't particularly want it. you can redesign those lights so you cut out the light that's going up, and then you start to see the stars start to appear. You can improve the design a little bit more, and you've got a bit more of the night sky showing, and you can turn the lights off altogether, and you've got a decent night sky. I actually made my first visit to Uluru in July this year, and there you see amazing night skies with the Milky Way going fully across the sky, and you've heard a bit about that in your other talks tonight, I'm sure. But also you may be familiar with Ray Norris and his family's work on the New Dreaming site, making that connection with the use of astronomy in mapping times to food sources, etc., in Aboriginal culture. But if you don't have those dark night skies, then you can't use the stars in that way. And it was so great if we could all just recover the wonder that all of people in ancient cultures had when they looked up at the sky and could see so many stars that we just don't see, because we're wasting energy spraying light up into the sky. So what are we doing with the Aboriginal bark paintings? Well, the main conservation issues there are that the pigments are friable. If you're talking about mineral pigments that have been ground very finely, they've been bound together with various natural protein materials, and then they've been painted onto the bark, which may have some variability in the way that it's been prepared, and which may actually cycle and change its shape with the environmental changes, so that it could be rounding up and rounding back and actually shaking the pigment off. So in terms of best way of keeping bark paintings at the moment, we link with the Australian Museum, and they have very specially designed holders to sit bark paintings on flat in drawers, and they have them in temperature and humidity controlled rooms. And that, is a sort of holding pattern. But binders in those paintings are natural proteins which are going to desiccate over time. This is going to happen. And we need to be aware of that. That this is, if we are going to want to preserve and conserve these Aboriginal bark paintings for the longer term, we need to start planning as to when we're going to do the research that will develop the treatments that will enable us to actually re-adhere those pigments to the bark so that we don't lose those. And you think about, you go to Europe and you can see all these wonderful marble statues, etc., around the place. Marble is a very stable material. Pigments on bark are not. So there really is if we want to have this cultural heritage in 1,000 years' time, this is, my mantra on this is the 1,000-year research project, okay? That we want to think about those problems and solve them sooner rather than later. We don't have to do it instantly, but we do need to start getting ready to do it. One of the other foci of the International Year is to improve life in the developing world. And there's been a number of companies and charities have been developing solar-powered light sources over the preceding years. And the International Year has been a marvellous opportunity to really raise a lot of money around the world so that those light sources can actually be delivered into communities where they make a real difference, where children who might be trying to improve their education, who might only have a kerosene lamp at home, which they can't necessarily afford the kerosene for, and kerosene lamps are incredibly unhealthy to use and have in confined areas. In the shorter term, replace that with solar-powered light sources that will enable kids and families to have light in their homes in the evenings is working very well and is one of the successes of the year. It's always a lot of fun you can have with light, and the International Year has also been supporting a lot of people in the art community who are designing, involved in all of our light festivals. So Vivid is one of Sydney's major events to attract people into the city, and these are some of the slides from this year's Vivid, which is also being noted with the International Year of Light. These are some of the light artworks that were at the in UNESCO headquarters when they had the launch of the International Year back in January this year. And you can see this one, the rainbow on the railway station in the Netherlands, that it actually involved a collaboration where they invented a whole new piece of technology to be able to create that rainbow display on that frontage of that train station. Okay, so we want to also highlight the impact on development. We want to raise awareness of disparities in the information access. When you look at the availability of internet access in Europe compared to Africa, then it's a very, very dramatic difference. These are the sorts of things that we are wanting to get onto the political agenda more strongly in the International Year of Light. So just to conclude, why light and optics? I hope that I've given you a flavour of why light is central to science, technology, art and culture. Light can promote education at all levels. Light technology drives development. Why is the International Year of Light important? The importance of light technology needs to be appreciated. I hope I'm helping you to appreciate it. International coordination creates durable programs, and we aim to inspire a new generation of people to study science. And I think in terms of a night like tonight, when you see people wanting to engage with science, there are certain areas of science that are naturally attractive to people. Astronomy is one of them, and I will put to you that light is another. Everybody loves rainbows. Everybody loves the aurora if they're lucky enough to see it. You know, these are things which are culturally important to all people. And I have a question here tonight because if anybody knows anything about the rainbow in Aboriginal culture that they can share with me, I would be very interested to know that, because I'm starting to wonder if there are some connections there that we should also be giving some attention to in the International Year of Light. So I'll finish at that point and I'll be happy to answer a couple of questions if there's time for that. Thank you very much. Any questions? Yeah.
Do we know that, is there much research to know how long, say if you don't do anything about a tree carving or something, how long that will last? So you can go to someone and say, hey, if we don't do something now, it's going to be gone in, say, 7 years. There's much research into the time, right?
Yeah. I mean, in terms of, our knowledge is really around the things that we've collected and have been in collections for some time and what we know about them. If you take things for wood items, then probably most of the knowledge is derived from totem poles. And certainly there, most of those totem poles were originally painted, and so the pigment has completely disappeared before they've even been put in collections in most cases. Then it's, I think one of the challenges that museums and art galleries have at the moment is that they don't have the resources to be monitoring their collections in the way that they would like to be able to. So there's a certain element of things maybe sitting in drawers that aren't getting looked at often enough, and that issues are arising and not being sort of noticed until it's too late. So that's a real issue. But in terms of, if materials are naturally going to rot in some way, then you need to know what causes the rot. And mostly it's moisture in the case of water. So then you're looking at whether you can sensibly control the moisture level. It's bacteria or fungi, whatever. And so then again you're looking at what level of sterility you might need in the environment. But for most things you'd like them to be regularly monitored and for things to be picked up and dealt with as and when needed. And I think it's pretty clear that the resource level in art galleries and museums is really not sufficient for that at the moment, for their collections as a whole. Yeah.
I get a sense that there's quite a lot of interest in social engineering in your discussion, but what do you imagine the political will is of some of this?
So, was there a particular issue that you wanted to focus on?
Well, for example, even just street lights, just so that we can change that kind of consciousness that may express itself in other ways.
Yeah, well, I mean, in some parts of the world, Europe is very forward-thinking in these regards. They are changing urban lighting in whole townships as we stand here and sit here. So I think, it's in terms of, in Australia, I'd say we don't have a very strong environmental fibre in the community generally that would actually would insist on these things happening. When you see the sorts of things that are happening in Europe, then they do want to be able to meet their comfortable lives using less energy, and they're doing a lot of things to achieve that. So, and they have the political parties that they've elected are in large part doing that on their behalf. So I think obviously it is political whether or not these things happen. It's a public-private investment that will cause these things to happen, and it is happening elsewhere in the world. Yeah.
Just wondering, are we overlighted in the Western world? I mean, what you said about the use of the light, we're not lighting the sky, but we look at the ground. And it reminded me of those magical times, when I walked just out by the moonlight, going out in the garden, just having the light given by the fireflies, which is what it is, insects. So I wonder if we can have that kind of experience again ever, or it's gone forever.
Well, and this, part of, there is now a movement to establish low light heritage sites. Okay. And, as I said, I visited Nauru in July. You can go there and you can just put yourself out away from the resort and you can enjoy a very nice stargazing experience. So, there are still places that you can have this experience. If it's something that we want more of, then we have to identify it as something that we want and ask for it. And, to me, I think it would be good for us all if we could enjoy our brighter night skies. These are the things that you can have as part of your life as you go about your business that just somehow make everybody feel better. And we can clearly do with a few more of those at the moment, I suggest. Yeah.
I have a question about if there are any laws that exist about how much light can be given into a community in the city or not. It just came to my mind because I was interested in changing something when I was sitting at the Tunnel station late at night, and without many trains running, suddenly I was aware, which I wasn't in the daytime, that there were advertising movie screens playing ads to me over the loudspeakers that I've found very invasive. And I wondered if there are ways to turn this kind of invasive advertising with light, for example, around, and what are the laws, and how can we speak out and say that we're not limited or changed?
I'm sorry, I can't tell you anything about the laws involved in that, but it certainly is a discussion that occurs regularly, and there will be some sort of bylaws around it, just as there is for noise nuisance.
That's very interesting because they have real estate agencies now have their signs are now lit up, so you can see them at all hours of the day and night. And they're quite annoying when you're driving along the street. That's just noise.
Yeah.
Advertising.
I find in visiting cities like Singapore, I don't like that. You can't walk down the street without those massive, very, very bright screens just everywhere. But again, it's a matter of personal taste, and what's going to be legislated about is going to be about the average of what people want. Yeah.
Just to come back to, I suppose I've used this platform to discuss on a community level our concerns that are currently brought up in certain areas. In the year of light, in your knowledge, is there an international discussion being had currently about this kind of thing?
No, I think the focus has been primarily around the low light associated with astronomy. and improving urban lighting and not wasting energy. But I'll certainly try and follow up. But if you